Well, the Ford EcoSport, it's a car which simply does not need any introduction because it has a huge fan following in India, and also because it is a car which originally started off the compact SUV revolution here in India. But of late, this car has been facing a lot of challenge and a lot of stiff competition from the likes of the Maruti Suzuki Vitara Brezza as well as the Tata Nexon. And now Ford have decided to give it a major overhaul in terms of not only the looks on the outside but also its interiors as well as a new petrol engine. So what are these changes all about and how good is the new car? We'll find that out on the show today. Well, when you're on the outside, you'll think that this car is an MMC, but as soon as you enter the cabin, you'll think that, well, this is not an MMC, but an FMC. And what are those terminologies? Well, inside industry terms, FMC means a full model change, while MMC means a minor model change. But on the interior, this car has been changed dramatically. You get a completely new design for the center console, the gauges are all new, and the seats also have got additional cushioning as well as a little bit more width in them. Well, the earlier car used to have a plethora of buttons over here which could be very intimidating as well as very confusing for first-time users. But the new one now has a very easy and very intuitive to operate 8-inch touchscreen. This touchscreen also comes with Apple's CarPlay as well as Android Auto in them, which means that you can directly hook up your phone with the system, because this car also gets Ford's Sync 3 technology, which means that it is a great system for connectivity. Well, I have to say that this system is a lot more legible and a lot more easier to use than the system on its other rivals, and even in the harshest of harsh sunlights, it is very easy to read because it has very good brightness. Now, in terms of overall quality, the plastic quality is more or less the same as the earlier car, and Ford seems to have definitely improved the quality of the switchgear, and it is better than the older version. The seats also, I just mentioned, have got better width now, and they are much better at accommodating people who have bigger girth like me, and support for the lower back is very good, support for the under thighs is excellent. So these seats should keep you very comfortable on those long highway trips. In terms of overall storage places, you get this huge box over here where you can of course keep a lot of stuff, and it is a very deep box. As you can see, a couple of beverage holders over here where you can keep your favorite fruity beverage, you can keep your wallet as well as your cell phone ahead of the gear lever, and the door bins are large enough to house those big 1-liter bottles. The only downside is that the glove box over here isn't the biggest in terms of capacity, but it is more than adequate because the other places all across are pretty good. So are there any downsides inside the cabin? Well, there is of course one downside, and I'm just nitpicking right now, and that downside is that the AC controls now are slightly towards the lower end of the dashboard, which means that if you are on the highway or if you are in the city and driving this car at speed and you want to change the setting for the AC, you will have to take your eyes off the road very briefly. The earlier car had them slightly higher, which was a little easier to operate them, but I am, remember, just nitpicking. It really isn't a big issue. Well, the first thing that you will notice as soon as you enter the EcoSport is the reassuring door third. Yes, it is a door third which is solid and much solid than most of its rivals, and this is something that you will appreciate if you care about safety. You will also appreciate the fact that this car has an option of 6 airbags. This is the only car in the segment which offers you 6 airbags, so that's something that you should of course think about. Knee room is pretty good. Headroom also is more than adequate for someone who is my height, which for reference is 5'10". So people who are about 6'2" or 6'3" should be quite okay in these seats. Now these seats are pretty good in terms of support for your lower back. The backrest angle is spot on, and support for your under thighs is also very good. The hip as well as knee angle also is very good. You really do sit up above these seats, which means you sit on them rather than sunk into them, and that's very good for comfort. Now it is a decent car in terms of width. It's not the widest car, but it is decent, and you can have 3 occupants over here. One area where it is slightly behind the Tata Nexon is the fact that there are no AC vents at the back, something that the Nexon offers. But to be honest, the throw of AC is pretty good. The vents over there are pretty good in terms of throwing at the back, so this car does cool the cabin really fast. So no AC vents isn't really a big issue, but yes, for people who really do brochure to brochure comparisons, that's something that you might feel disappointed about. Well, so in terms of boot space, it's very similar to the outgoing car. You of course get a nice and boxy boot, which means you can generally put in those big boxes into it. But the only issue is that there is a bit of a ledge, but Ford have thought about that ledge as well, because you get a false floor along with this boot now, and you can move it up and it becomes a flat area, which means that you can simply shove in those boxes without putting too much of your back into it. And if you want more space, you can always drop the backrest down over here, and once you drop it, you can move this even one position higher, and you get a completely flat loading areas. So overall, Ford have been very thoughtful with this false floor and given you more usability and more practicality with the boot. The only negative is that this door opens like this, so if you have a car parked right next to it, it might be a little difficult to load this boot, and that's one area where its other rivals have a slight advantage. They have proper hatch openings which are easier and more usable to load the boot in with. Well, so the big change on the new EcoSport is, of course, the introduction of the new 1.5 litre 3-cylinder engine. Now, what is this engine all about? Is it better than the old one? Definitely yes, it is much better, both in terms of responsiveness as well as in terms of refinement levels. And you will instantly notice that this car is a lot more responsive from low throttle inputs, which makes it a very good car for the city. You also get a new automatic gearbox for people who drive automatics. It's a great gearbox. It's not a dual clutch, but it is a proper torque converter gearbox. It feels pretty responsive, and it is also pretty well gelled with this engine. Well, so how is the automatic gearbox on the new EcoSport petrol? I have to say that I am pretty impressed with its automatic gearbox. It is a very quick-witted gearbox, and you also get these flappy pedals behind the steering wheel, which is a unique feature, remember, because no other compact SUV offers flappy pedals or an automatic gearbox for that matter. At this price point, the Vitara Brezza as well as the Nexon do not have it, and that is something which is unique to the petrol EcoSport. And I have to say that the gearbox is quite good in terms of shift up and down, and even when you're using it manually, there is hardly any lag in the gearbox, so that makes it a nice gearbox for usage, especially if you're driving too much in the city. Well, the 1.5 litre diesel engine remains the same, so it is a great motor for refinement, and it is a very good choice for people who drive a lot, want something which is responsive, and also want something which is very refined, because the responsiveness of the diesel engine is very, very good. It starts responding from around 1400, 1500 RPM, which isn't a very typical diesel engine habit, because a lot of common rail engines respond only from around 8900. So that's something which is very unique to this engine, and also makes the diesel motor on the Ford EcoSport ideal for driving in the city. Now, the EcoSport has always been a great car for keen drivers. It goes around bends very nicely and very sharply. The steering wheel feels pretty agile. The chassis also is pretty well tuned for sporty handling, and the new one is better than the outgoing car because Ford engineers have given it a new set of tires. These tires are wider than the older version, and they definitely add a lot more agility as well as grip to the already agile chassis of the EcoSport, making it a very enjoyable car for keen drivers. Well, what you'll also like about the Ford EcoSport is its rock-solid stability on the highway. This car really has a sense of authority when you are doing 3-digit speeds on the highway, and it feels very stable, very reassuring, something which can do miles at an end. And it's also a car which will leave you rather relaxed at the end of a long journey, because the steering wheel on the new EcoSport is a lot lighter than the outgoing car. Now, being lighter than before doesn't mean that this car's steering wheel suddenly feels nervous or doesn't have the same kind of feedback that the older car had. It still feels pretty responsive, it still feels very communicative, but because it's a lot lighter now, it's a lot easier to drive this car around the city, and it's also a lot easier to park it into tighter parking spaces. Well, Ford engineers have managed a solid blend in terms of agility as well as comfort on the EcoSport. Yes, even though this car feels rock solid at high speeds, at slow city speeds, this car doesn't crash into those potholes. It simply glides over them, and when you are pushing it into corners, the body roll is well under control. The communication from the steering wheel is always spot on, and the tires also have very good grip level. So it's a great car. It's a great all-round car, in fact, for not only ride, comfort, but also for handling. Another point that most buyers will appreciate are these big windows all across, and the view from the back also is pretty good. The side view mirrors are also of a very good size, so you get a very good view of whatever's happening behind you. And overall, that is something that you will truly appreciate if you drive a lot in the city and are always stuck in chock-a-block city traffic, because you can always see a couple of cars further down. Well, so overall, the Ford EcoSport comes across as a very good all-rounder. It's fun to drive, it has a long list of safety kit, It's also got decent cabin space, and it has a very fuel efficient as well as a very refined diesel engine. And what I'm trying to say here is that if you're in the market for a compact SUV, then it's very hard to build a case against the Ford EcoSport. It really is that good. It's bye for now and hope to see you soon.